We can find this poem, The Lay of Humir, in the Codex Regius. It's a relatively late piece, dating from the 11th or the 12th century. You can also find a version of this story in Snorri's Prose Edda. It starts with Thor getting back to Asgarth in a foul mood, insulting ferrymen under his breath. When he walked inside his father's hall, it was to find Aegir seated in the place of honour. Aegir was a giant and a minor god of the sea. He was placed there, with his seaweed hair dripping everywhere, drinking from Thor's best cups. He was boasting about how his hall was even bigger than this one, and how Jotun were better at partying. Everyone was drinking and having a good time. They were also casting wands above the blood of the beast they'd slaughtered for the feast. Apparently, if you study sacrificial blood, you can read the future. Don't try this at home, please. Thor walked into the hall, hungry and tired. His father spotted him and waved him over. "What took you so long?" asked Othin. "We were waiting for you, Thor." Thor, who'd had a bad time with Skrimir, then a bad time with Utgarfaloki, and then a bad time with Horbath, was not in the mood for this. He'd just come back from Jotunheimr, where his job was to get rid of giants, and here he came home to find a giant had been invited. He went and sulked in a corner, listening to the conversations as he drank his beer. When Aegir was ready to leave, he shook hands with Othin. Othin asked, "Where shall we meet next time?" Thor answered before Aegir had a chance to. He'd been waiting for an opportunity like this the whole evening. "Well, if Aegir's house is so much better, we might as well go to his place next time. Right, Aegir?" What Thor didn't say, but thought loud enough, was, "See how you like it when it's me coming to your house and eating all your food and insulting your cooking. See if it's fun." Aegir argued he would never be able to brew beer for all the gods. He didn't have a cauldron big enough for so many guests. So he was very sorry, but no, he couldn't invite them. "Has anyone got a Jotun kinsman we could borrow a brew pot from?" asked Thor. "I feel like the Jotun owe me one right now." "I do," said Loki. "Not you." "Why not me?" asked Loki, rather offended. Loki was hurt, but Thor remembered what Horbath had said about Sif, and he didn't want to be such good friends with Loki after all. "Tyr," said Thor, "you have Jotun in your family, right? Know someone we could trick his cauldron from?" Tyr, not expecting to be dragged into this, sputtered that no, not really, he wasn't a big one for tricking people. As the god of war and justice, deceit wasn't really his thing. But Thor insisted, and so Tyr admitted he had some giants in his family. When Thor asked him if one of them had a pot big enough, Tyr reluctantly revealed he knew Humir, who had a cauldron a league wide. Even Aegir had to admit that was probably enough. Tyr said he didn't mind coming along. Loki left in a huff because Thor didn't want him with them. But then, I'm sure he found things to do in Asgarth when Thor wasn't there. So as you can see, in this myth, Loki has been substituted for Tyr. Tyr comes through as a pale counterpart to Thor, rather than a god of war in his own right. He does what Loki would do, which is basically bring Thor to Jotunheimr and help him trick giants, without engaging in any battles himself. There are strong chances it was Loki who came with Thor in earlier versions. According to Snorri, Thor dresses up as a young boy to go to Humir's house. I'm not a big fan of Thor hiding who he is, as that's more something I feel Othin would do, so I'll stick to the version in which he goes as himself, dragging Tyr along. They went east, because everyone knows Jotunheimr is eastwards of the world, until they came upon Humir's house. Tyr knocked on the door. "Granny, it's me, Tyr," he shouted. Tyr's grandmother opened the door. She was a monstrous Jotun with 900 heads. "What is it you want?" shrieked the heads. Behind her came Tyr's mother, a beautiful woman as fair as dawn. Thor looked from grandmother to mother and smiled. "Lucky you take after your mum, isn't it?" he said. To be honest, in earlier versions Tyr's grandmother didn't have that many heads, as it's most probably a later addition. But still, you get the idea. The hideous stepmother and the beautiful mother. Although what she was doing married to a Jotun, only Othin knows. Tyr's mother invited them in and brought them drinks. She asked Tyr how he was doing in Asgarth, and if all the other gods were being nice to him, and said he should visit more often, and offered to do his laundry if he'd brought anything he needed her to wash. When she heard Humir's step outside, though, she said that Thor and Tyr should hide. "I'll break the news that you're here to him first," she said. "He can get a bit grouchy around guests." There were several pots and cauldrons hung above their heads in the vast hall. Tyr's mother hid her son and Thor in one of them. The grandma sat by the fire and grumbled to herself, which is easier to do when you've got several heads. Humir stamped inside, icicles stuck in his beard, and asked if dinner was ready yet. "It will soon be," said Tyr's mother. "But just before that, I've got some good news. Tyr has come round to visit with one of his friends. They're just over there." Humir glared across the room, and his gaze was so hard it split one of the pillars of his home, sending the 8 pots tied to the ceiling crashing to the ground. It must have been complicated for Tyr's mum to keep a clean house with a husband who could stare things to pieces. All of the pots shattered, except for the one Thor and Tyr were hiding in, the biggest and most impressive cauldron of the house. When the 2 Aesir crawled out of it, Humir didn't seem chuffed. "You realize you've invited a renowned murderer for dinner?" he asked his wife. "I don't murder people," said Thor. "I only kill giants." "Yes," said the giant, "I know." But it was too late to throw them out now, and Tyr was his stepson after all, so Humir invited them to share his evening meal. In preparation, his wife had slaughtered 3 bulls and put them to roast above the fire. Thor, with his usual restraint, ate 2 of the bulls all by himself, leaving the others to share out the 3rd one. Humir watched all this, his frown deepening. "We'll have to get some more food tomorrow at this rate," he grumbled. "I'll go fishing, so we can eat what I catch." "I'll come and help," said Thor. He added that they should do a fishing contest. Whoever won would take what he wanted from the loser. "And I want that cauldron," added Thor. Humir grumbled that was exactly why you shouldn't invite Aesir, but he took up the bet, saying Thor would prove to be rather weak. After all, the rumour was already spreading about his humiliation in Utgarthaloki's hall, and it would be a great honour for Humir to be the giant who definitely broke the thunderous spirit. The next morning, Humir and Thor were up early. Thor asked Humir what they should use as bait. "I've got mine," said Humir. "Find your own." Thor wandered outside the house, searching for something big enough to serve as bait. He saw Humir's bulls grazing. He chose the fattest one, the best beast of the herd, called Himinriot. He held him by the horns, and he twisted the animal's neck until the head came off. When he got back to Humir, the giant was even grumpier than before. "I thought your table manners were bad, but this beats it," said Humir. "Who said you could use my cattle?" "You said find your own bait," said Thor. "I didn't mean pillage my home to find it," growled Humir. So they left in good spirits, as you can see. Tyr stayed behind to spend some quality time with his mum. They rowed out to sea. Thor didn't stop rowing until they were far away from land, above the deep waters where Jormungandr sleeps. The 2 men started fishing. Humir fished a few whales, offhandedly, as you do when you're a giant. Thor saw this and decided he needed an even bigger prey. He passed a metal hook through the bull's head and let it drop to the bottom of the ocean. He waited. The smell of blood woke up Jormungandr. He saw the bull's head, and he couldn't resist the temptation. He swallowed it whole. The hook went through his mouth, and the snake shrieked in pain. He tugged at the hook wildly. Above the surface, Thor felt this. He started hauling Jormungandr up, but the Midgarth serpent was pulling so hard that both of Thor's fists slammed down against the boat's gunwale. Furious at being bullied by what was, in his mind, only an overweight eel, Thor used his Aesir strength. He grew to his full height, which was big enough for his feet to touch the ocean floor. His feet firmly set on the ground, he pulled until he'd raised Jormungandr's head out of the water. It was an enormous head, with crooked fangs dripping venom. The waves were rushing around them, crashing as the beast holding them together was lifted out of the sea. There are 2 versions of this encounter. In one of them, Humir was horrified by the sight of Jormungandr and Thor facing each other down. He believed he wouldn't survive their fight, whoever won in the end. To be honest, he was probably right about that one. He threw himself forward to cut the fisherman's threat, and the snake sunk back into the water and disappeared. In another version, Thor actually lands a hit on Jormungandr's head. He strikes him with Mjolnir, and the serpent howls in pain before ripping himself free of the hook and plunging back into the sea. There might even have been a version in which Thor killed Jormungandr during this encounter, because Snorri feels the need to tell us that, although some people believe the Midgard monster is dead, he believes Jormungandr is still alive, and will stay underwater until his final fight with Thor. However it happened, Jormungandr escaped. Humir shakily offered they row home. As they were doing so, Thor said he'd won the bet, but Humir answered that he had brought in 6 whales, while Thor had nothing to show for the day out, and a fishing contest implied actually fishing something. So no, Thor hadn't won. Thor wasn't satisfied with this, and said he would prove his strength to Humir, so the giant had no choice but to give him his cauldron. They rowed quietly until they reached land. When they moored the boat, Thor carried it with the 6 whales inside it. He brought it from the beach to Humir's house, just to show he could do it. "Impressive," said Humir. "Such a shame it's got nothing to do with the fishing contest, isn't it?" Thor was getting annoyed, and he bellowed he wanted another challenge, so he could prove his worth and get that cauldron. To silence him, Humir gave him a crystal wine glass. He asked Thor to break it, and said he would give him the brew pot if the Thunderer could do so. That'll keep him busy, thought Humir to himself. And it did. Thor threw the wine glass on the floor, but instead of breaking, it went through the stone as if through mud. As he was getting angry, Thor threw it against one of the pillars of the house, supposedly the one that was still standing. Of course, the pillar broke, but the wine glass survived without a crack. "You'd better give him a clue on how to do this, or he'll destroy the house," said Tyr to his mum. So Tyr's mother went up to Thor and whispered, "You should try breaking it against something harder than the glass." The only thing harder here is Humir's stubborn face. Thor hesitated between trying Mjolnir or Humir's head. In the end, he smashed the wine glass down on Humir's skull, and, as Tyr's mother had predicted, the glass shattered. "Take the blasted cauldron then, if you must," said Humir. "I've lost my best bowl, my wine glass, all of my pots, and most of my house because of you. Get out of here, and don't come back soon." Tyr went to pick up the cauldron so they could leave, but despite being a decent god of war, and the only god whose name actually means god, Tyr couldn't lift it. So in the end it was Thor who had to carry the cauldron back to Aegir. Now at the very end of this piece, as Tyr and Thor are travelling back home, there's a reference to Thor's goats again, and how they were wounded through Loki's shenanigans. This only features in 2 stanzas, and is suspected to be an addition, as it normally features in Utgarfa Loki's tale. But the truth is, this myth is probably a compound of several myths anyway. The story of tricking a Jotun to get his cauldron is one story, and the fight of Thor with Jormungandr as he fishes him out of the sea is a different tale altogether. So there are at least 3 different myths crushed together here. But there is no doubt about the importance of bringing back a cauldron to Aegir. Although Thor didn't know it at the time, one of the last feasts before Ragnarok would happen here. It's in Aegir's house that the Lokasena would take place, and Loki would admit to having killed Balder. I hope you liked this episode of Bullying Humir. Next time we'll see how Freya got Brisingamen. At last we'll have the guys turning into seals for a wrestling match. Cheers!